fellow romance readers, I'm Amy.
And I'm Sarah, and this is Post-Book Depression. You know that feeling you get when you finish a good book that you didn't want to end?
Have you finished a book and just weren't ready to move on from the story and its beloved characters? You find yourself needing just a little more? This multi-trope romance podcast gives you the opportunity to dig deeper with us into books we love as we discuss all the reasons we can't move on.
Feeling chatty? You can continue the conversation with us on Instagram at Post-Book Depression Podcast or on Facebook in our Post-Book Depression discussion group.
We would be so grateful if you would subscribe to our podcast and take a moment to leave a review.
Are you ready? Let's discuss.
Hi everyone, welcome to the show. I'm Amy.
And I'm Sarah, and today we're going to be discussing The Best of All by Karla Soresen.
The first few minutes we're going to do a brief review of this story without any spoilers, then we are going to shift into a deeper book discussion that's going to include plenty of spoilers, but don't worry, as always, we're going to let you know before we do shift into that deeper book discussion.
That's right, so before we jump in, Amy, tell us a little bit of what we can expect from this story.
Two enemies who are constantly bickering are forced to face reality when their two best friends suddenly pass away and leave their 2-year-old daughter in their care to parent together. This story has humor, banter, and a cinnamon roll male main character. Sarah, what did you think about The Best of All?
I love this story. I love all of Karla's stories. I've read them all. This one just, it was so incredible, and I love the male main character and the female and how they're kind of enemies to frenemies to more. And it just, I don't know, the story was so beautiful. And
this was my first story that I've read by Karla, and I absolutely loved it. I loved the male main character's ooey gooiness inside. He's got this tough exterior and presents this one facade, but really inside, of course, he's a cinnamon roll.
I know.
I loved it so much.
I know. She's the best.
All right, let's get into our ratings. Angst.
This was just a 1 for me.
Same.
Yeah.
Yeah, it wasn't very heavy on the angst. I didn't feel.
No.
All right, humor.
It's like a 1.25.
I did 1.75. There is a scene particular that I laughed out loud so hard and so long. It was fabulous, and I want to talk about it in the deeper discussion. All right, spiciness.
This was a 2.5 for tension. This is a slow burn, but Karla has a way of writing her stories where you're just waiting for everything to kind of...
I was a little under you. I did 1.75. It is definitely a slow burn. And then when it hits, it hits.
It hits, but there's so much tension.
Yes.
And there's thought.
Delicious
and
tension.
she makes you want these characters to just
be together.
Ignite earlier than they do. But she won't, because she likes her slow burns.
All right. Tears.
This was a 1.5 for me because of what it... the reason why this couple, you mentioned it in the main, some parents die and they have to take care of their little girl.
Yeah.
And that for me as a mom was like,
yeah, I did 1 out of 5. It's not so much that there are crying scenes or anything like that.
It's not throughout the story.
Mm-hmm. In fact, it's right at the top of the story.
Yeah, just the sadness of it.
All right, overall.
This was a 5.
I did 4.5. It was so good.
It was so good.
I also want to make mention of the fact that I did listen to the audiobook of this story, and the actors in the audiobook were just phenomenal.
So good.
I feel like the performance of that deserves a 5.
I agree.
Phenomenal. So if you prefer audiobooks, definitely check this one out because it was a great one. But if you don't like that, then I think it's a great story.
I did it both. I did audio, and then when I couldn't do, if I couldn't do the book, I would listen to the audio, because when I read a Karla book, I just have to read and read and read and read and read.
And the male main character is British, so having that as an audiobook was just chef's kiss. So good.
So good.
That concludes our spoiler-free quick review of this story. Now we're going to shift into a deeper book discussion that's going to include lots of spoilers. If you haven't checked this story out, please go do that and then come back and join us on this deeper discussion. We would love to hear from you. You can find us on social media on Instagram at Post-Book Depression Podcast, on Facebook in our Post-Book Depression discussion group, and you can also email us at postbookdepressionpodcast@gmail.com. This story begins in the hospital. Chris and Amy have just given birth to, well, I guess not Chris, but Amy's just given birth to Mira. Mm-hmm. And Chris and Amy's best friends, Zoe and Liam, are there to see Mira and the parents and kind of show their support of this birth. And let's just start talking about this opening scene.
This opening scene was so good because you can already feel the tension when she's nervous, that when Zoe is nervous that Liam is going to come in. She's thinking about her empty ring finger, what his thoughts are, that he's going to gloat or rub it in. So you immediately are wondering, what's happened?
I'm very intrigued.
Why would one man choose to gloat? So it was kind of one of those things like, do they have a history? Do they not? You know, what is it? What does that look like? In this scene, I mean, they're both really good friends with Amy and Chris, and they want them to be Mira's godparents, which is so sweet. This is also where Zoe gives her first duck, which is just becomes an obsession of hers, like a whole theme throughout, which I have to say I thought was adorable.
I did too. I loved the opposite ends of the perspective that both Zoe and Liam have in regards to Mira. We have Zoe, who's goo goo gaga over the baby. She's getting a little baby fever. And then we have Liam, who's just, nope.
Yep.
I'm out.
You want to hold her? No, I might hurt her.
So you already kind of have this comedic basis for the banter and just the animosity between Zoe and Liam and how that's starting to transpire. We still don't know the history of their relationship at this point, but I did find that scene comical, and I also enjoyed, their perspectives as Chris and Amy asked them to be the godparents, and of course Zoe's like, I'm all in.
I know.
And Liam agrees, but not really understanding the full ramification of what he signed up for or agreed to.
Yeah. Better know what you're doing when you say yes to that question.
I had that same thought. At the birth of Mira, we do learn that Zoe was recently divorced. And then, of course, there's a 2.5-year time jump into the next chapter. Her husband, Charles, was not a nice guy.
Right.
She wanted this beautiful future, and Charles, her husband, just was not a good dude, and it ended in divorce.
Right.
We'll get into that more when we start to dig into Liam's 10-year crush on Zoe, so we'll save basically Charles, that whole thing for later. Let's talk about Chris and Amy's death and how this impacts Liam and Zoe and Mira, of course.
Well, so we learn that they pass away from a car crash because they are called into the lawyer's office because they are now the guardians of Mira.
Which Zoe has been keeping her the last couple of weeks.
Right. She's been keeping. So Zoe has been next door neighbor to Chris and Amy for the last 2.5 years, basically right after her divorce. And so Mira is with her. She's been kind of handling all that. But this is the point where we find out it's official. They have custody of her, and they're you would think that they would kind of know that when they're asked to be the godparents, because that is kind of the expectation of a godparent.
Yeah, isn't there paperwork to be signed to officially do that? Like in a will or a trust?
Yes, yeah, you would need to do that. Well, I mean, yes and no. So if you put it in your will, you can say...
they don't have to agree to it if it's in a will or a trust.
Not necessarily. You can write it down, and then if that's in your will, then that just lets people know after you've passed that this is who's going to raise my children. Zoe is all for it. She's kind of in the mindset of nobody is taking this child from me over...
She doesn't know that Liam is set to be a co-parent with her.
Right, which you would think she would know that, again, because he is the godfather, but Liam shows up, doesn't really know what's going to take place, and he just has the most he's
very defiant.
Yeah,
it's a defiant no.
I was trying to think of what's a good way to describe his reaction, but it's basically, have they lost their minds? Why didn't they tell me this? He feels frustration with Chris because nobody told him why. He needs an explanation as to why,
because he's been very clear through the years that he doesn't want children. Kids. Yeah.
Right, so he's baffled, and basically he storms out, and Zoe rushes after him, and he tells her, I'll send a check.
I love the part where she comes back to him when he says, I can't do this, and I don't want to. And she says, but they chose you.
Right.
So kind of putting him in his place a little bit, even though he didn't really care to hear it.
Yeah, I think that would be really hard. You would definitely have to know your friend to know that no matter what they say, you see something in them that they don't see in themselves, and you know they're capable of. And that's what I love about this story, because the reality is we have godparents for our children. I don't want anybody raising my kids that doesn't want them.
Yeah.
If they're not going to love them like they're their own, they're already going to be going through something very traumatic that no child should have to go through. So why place them upon somebody that thankfully Mira does not know, and she knows him as Uncle Liam, even though he has fought that throughout the years that Chris kind of pushes that name on him. But
yeah,
she's too young to understand that Liam is having his feelings.
Zoe makes an agreement with the lawyer that instead of signing the paperwork, signing Liam's rights away, they're going to give him a little bit of time just to see if he changes his mind. So she agrees to take Zoe on full-time custody, and she's processing being a single mom for a bit of time with Mira. And so not only is she having to navigate through the loss of her best friends and the parents of Mira, she's also having to be a first-time mom on her own to a 2.5-year-old. As you can imagine, that's a lot of stress, and she's feeling very overwhelmed. Let's talk about the scene where Liam shows up at her door after Zoe has been taking care of Mia for a little bit of time. He's had a dream, which Chris is in, and this whole dream is what kind of shifts his mindset. And even up in this point when he comes to visit Zoe, he has not made the decision yet to help. So let's talk about these scenarios.
Well, I think he feels a lot of guilt when he shows up, because in the dream, Chris says, "You'll take care of my family, won't you? Or you'll take care of her, won't you?" I don't know if he just believes Chris is trying to reach out to him through a dream or what. Guilty conscience, maybe. But he does seek Zoe out to see how things are going. And he can see when he gets there, she is utterly exhausted. And she is having to do this. Starts crying, and which is overwhelming for him. And I mean, when you're having to defend saying you're the last person I want to cry in front of. Whew.
Oh, yeah, awkward.
And before he even thinks about what he's saying, he just, okay, I'm in. I'm going to help. I'll move in here. He's going to jump in and start sharing the weight and the load of raising Mira so that Zoe's not having to do it on her own, because he can't take it, because he's secretly in love with her.
I love that inner dialogue that we get on his perspective through this whole scene, because, you realize just what turmoil he's having to fight internally. He doesn't really want to do it, but he also doesn't want her to have to carry the burden alone, and doesn't want Mira to have to be, on her own as well.
Right.
And his loyalty to his friend Chris. One of my most favorite delightful moments, after he agrees to help take care of Mira, he's moved into the house next door. He's decided they're just going to take it 1 week at a time, a month at a time, slow bits of time, just to see how they navigate together. And Zoe, like me, is a type A person and has lots of lists, lots of binders with step-by-step instructions. She has to go out of town for a couple of days. And so Liam has agreed to keep Mira. And I absolutely freaking love his adamancy that he is not going to need the binders. He does not need the binders. And the first scenario right out of the gate is bath time. Well, the dinner technically is the first
the macaroni
one.
and cheese, because he's not using that orange
he made it wrong.
Powder stuff. He made it with real ingredients.
Then the bath scene. Friend, this made me laugh so hard throughout this entire scene, because you have, Mira is fighting him tooth and nail. She needs her bath duck, and he cannot find it for the life of him. And just the fact that he goes to the binder and there's cameras on the kitchen, that Zoe witnesses him going to the binder, finding exactly where the bath duck is, doing the bath scene, putting her down, and then the text that Zoe sends him
with the screenshot. Yeah.
I laughed so hard. It was so funny. Why do I love these real gruff men getting put in their place with a small child? Why do I love that so much?
Because it's funny. Because kids are funny. And when he says the line, and if you've ever been around kids, you don't even have to have kids to know this. If you've ever been around a small child, and he says, "How much can a 2.5-year-old
famous last words
do or need or whatever?" And I'm just like, oh, bro, dude, no. Okay, well, somebody is going to need some help at some point. I love that he just fights it so much mentally, and just, it's like, oh, it drives him crazy. He hates that he has to open that. I love, though, at the end of it, whenever he finally concedes and says that he needs to probably read through the binders to know things, because there's a few things that happen that if he just would have
Wouldn't be so
looked at the
stubborn.
notes. You know, and I'm sitting there thinking, in my head, I'm like, she's not trying to boss you around. It's not like she was living with Mira 24/7. These are the battles she had to face first on her own.
She's made it simple for him.
Yeah, yes, exactly. That's what I'm thinking. I'm like, man, she like just gave you the instruction manual. What's the problem? Like, it's
She even
not
makes
like,
that statement. I wish I had binders when I was trying to figure things out.
Yeah, because she's probably crying in the shower at night because just didn't know how to get through each day, you know? I love those scenes like that.
It was
They're the
so
best.
good. Well, in trying to find Bath Ducky, he discovers that Mira is obsessed with ducks. Which brings us to a nickname alert.
Oh, best nickname.
I know, not a romantic nickname alert, but he starts calling her Duck. And friend, in that British accent, when he calls her Duck, melt me into a puddle on the floor every time he calls her Duck.
The first time he did it, I was listening to the audiobook at that point and not on my e-reader, and I just swooned so hard because it was just the sweetest moment, and I was like, there's this big man, and he's just giving this little girl this nickname, and it's so sweet because he picks up on that she has a duck for everything, and he also recognizes that the duck she sleeps with at night is the duck that Zoe got her when she was born. And yeah, duck pajamas, all the ducks. I loved it. I loved it, and it was the perfect nickname. And
I also love that she will honk his nose.
I know, and he growls. Oh, I could just that. Oh.
We're just spooning and gushing over what a cinnamon roll he is.
Oh, the best.
Let's move over into Liam's decade-long crush on Zoe. So this is where we're also going to tie in Charles. Let's talk about the scene because Zoe has carried with her for 10 years. She's felt animosity from him. She feels like he hates her. All because when they very first met, she was just newly engaged to Charles. Mm-hmm. And once he sees the ring on her finger, he makes this statement, something about the fact that it's not going to work out, and I hope
better luck with the second marriage.
So for 10 years, she's just felt this hatred coming off to him. Well, we learned that it's a coping mechanism because he has this major crush on her. And it's when she's getting ready to go back to her place to get some things that he finally opens up about this decade-long crush. Let's talk about the scene.
Yeah, this is right before she is moving in. Because he is actually staying in Chris and Amy's house because Mira kind of needs to be there. So they kind of decide that she's going to stay there as well. And when he tells her that, I think he definitely is trying to reassure her that, no, I don't feel this way anymore.
When he's struggling internally because he's had to put distance between the two of them for all these years so as not to cross any boundaries, and now she's going to be living under the same roof as him.
Poor guy. The agony. Oh, could you even imagine like being that attracted to somebody and like
having to suppress that?
Just stay here and you're no longer married. So anyway, no, yeah, he is definitely conflicted because he very quickly is thinking, this might not be a good idea, because he doesn't want to have to constantly suppress those feelings that.
And he does kind of lead us on to believe that it was in the past. His crush is in the past.
He tries to, I mean, I don't buy it, obviously, because he has too many, I mean, for goodness sakes, whenever he says that he's going to help her, it's because he can't bear her crying. Mm-hmm. And not one of those, I don't know what to do with tears, but, I can't watch her cry. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean?
Yep.
But she just, and it makes Zoe really have to reevaluate every single encounter they've had, because she does recall when she stops to think back, the first time she met him, he was one way, and then she puts her Harry Potter book to the side, and he sees her ring, and then he meets her fiance, and he completely changes the rest of the night. His whole demeanor.
Especially when he witnesses Charles' behavior at the party. And
he was just not a nice guy.
Yeah.
He was very demeaning and... Yeah, I didn't like him.
He knew she deserved better than him.
Mm-hmm.
And kind of used that to push her away in what he said to her.
Right.
Meaning Liam.
Right.
Since we're talking about Liam and Zoe's relationship, kind of building on that, you talked in the quick review about the tension and the banter and the slow burn building through this whole story. Once they move in together, it just really magnifies.
Yeah, it does.
Let's briefly talk about this. This
is so good. This is why I am a Karla addict. I I am. I've read everything she has put out, and so good. Her stories, she just has the best tension between these two characters where it's like they want each other. It does feel tangible. And it's not that I haven't read other authors that can write it that way, but the way she writes it, you have this giddy smile on your face and you're just like, you want to jump on your furniture. Just get together. But she doesn't give you that. She gives you the slow burn.
Makes it worth
and
the
it's
wait.
so good. It's so good. And Zoe and Liam, because he has these moments where he kind of flirts with her, and it's like each one, they're thinking, are they flirting with me? Are they not flirting with me? And then after that, once he confesses that, then Zoe she allows herself to see him in this other light, which if she really stops and thinks about it, she kind of always did, but she tried not to.
There were a couple of scenes that kind of lent toward her softening her heart towards him. The two that I'm thinking of specifically is when he has been reading with Mira on the couch and they fall asleep together after she's had her little girls' night out, and comes back and she puts a blanket out. I love that she sends him a text message like, I'm not going to let your cinnamon roll, your secret's safe with me, basically.
Right.
And then the other is when Mira gets a fever and he has this panic and calls her over, and then they end up falling asleep on the floor, he and Mira. Well, he first and then Mira joins her, and she comes in the next morning and they're snuggling on the floor together, and she just realizes he has softened so much to Mira and become so receptive to being a guardian of her and really caring about her.
One of the funny things about that scene is when she kisses Mira's forehead to see if she's running a fever, and he says, "You can't tell from that." I chuckle to myself because I remember my mom, when I was a kid, she used to do that. And I was like, you can't tell because, I'm just like, the only way you can tell if I have a fever is with a thermometer. And that is how I check my kids. I know because once they have that one fever, you can tell the difference in their body temperature. I'm like, you absolutely can tell if there is a temperature. You may not be able to tell how high, but you can tell if they have a temperature. So that was funny that she has to go and get the thermometer and check. And
prove it.
I love it too that she kind of talks him down because he's like, do we need to go to the doctor and stuff? And she's like, no, it's fine. And he's like, how do you know this? My best friend, because she would tell her and stuff. And I just thought that is the realest conversation because I remember feeling and thinking all those emotions.
I also love the scene at the gym when he's working out with his football team, and they're talking about whether he planned the birthday party yet, like months in advance, and he tells her, I will not be the reason that she doesn't have Moana there at her party. I laughed so hard at that scene.
That was so cute. That was a cute scene too when she comes in and then Mira goes and you just see all these big football players surrounding this little girl.
Made me so happy.
Drop down to the floor.
We'll go from happy to sad. Let's shift over to the therapy sessions. They decide that it's probably best for Mira to go through some counseling and them as well.
Sure.
The famous last words that Zoe has for Liam before they go in is that she promises he won't cry at therapy. And they go in, and of course the therapist is wanting to start at the very beginning with each of them individually and talk about their childhoods and how that is impacting Mira. And this scene just crushes you. And Liam, he doesn't really open up in this moment about his father and kind of his reservations for not wanting kids. It's not until he goes to find Mira. He storms out of the session and goes to find Mira and witnesses her drawing a family. And it's the three of them. And it's just, it really speaks to his heart. So he turns around and goes back to Zoe and the therapist and opens up about his dad. Let's talk about this scene.
This is very emotional because that's one of the reasons we know that Liam it's mentioned throughout the story, it's the reason he came to America and played American football versus soccer, but football around the world.
Yes.
Which I unite with the rest of the world on that terminology, by the way. I'm like, we should not be able to call it football here in America, but that's okay. It was already taken, but we stole it. I'll get off that soapbox. But he doesn't want to be like his dad. His dad is famous for European football. His dad was not a good man. His mom eventually left his dad because he was violent
Yes.
and abusive to her and to Liam. And I think that it was the first time with Liam, right?
Mm-hmm.
That she ends up leaving him.
Yes.
It's the second he touched Liam, he's gone. But Liam looks just like his dad. When he looks in the mirror, he sees his dad. And so he never, ever wanted, because his whole life he's been compared to his athleticism being like his dad.
Yeah.
He looks like his dad. And he was afraid that there would be some part of him that if he ever had a wife, if he ever had children, his dad would come out in him. And it's one of the things that kind of the hangups that he has, that he never wanted to have any kind of long-term relationship or anything, and never a family, because he's so scared.
Yes, and I love that he felt safe enough to open up to them about that and say, I will never hurt you, and Mira, making it clear that he would never do that. But what really speaks to me about his character is when he goes back to a therapy session on his own to talk through all of that and really start to maneuver through his feelings and work through the therapy sessions on his own so that he can improve himself.
I appreciated that therapy session, that first one, when he goes back on his own, because he's wanting to take Zoe out on a date, but he's scared and he wants to talk through some of his hang-ups. I love that the therapist is able to point out to him by asking him questions. Have you ever done this? Have you ever done that? Have you ever thought this? Have you ever experienced that? And all of his answers are no. And she says, that is you proving every single day you are not like your dad.
Yes.
That is putting into action that you're not like him. And it kind of clicks with Liam that, wow, all these years of preventing or keeping myself to not lash out or act that way, I have been actively proving that I am nothing like him. And I just like that little, what that does for him.
There's a scene in the pool where he has the inner dialogue and he thinks to himself that all three, he, Zoe, and Mira, are all working through fears on their own of different things. And it just kind of shows that even though they're in it together, they're each individually working, because this is when she's working with her with the pool duck and trying to get her not to be afraid of swimming. And I just like that he brought to light that they were all three working on fears.
I know, that was great.
Let's move over to their date at the library. That was a fun scene.
This was the best date.
And the ice cream.
This is the best date. He's like...
Also, I love that she eats ice cream for dinner.
It's
such a me thing to do.
I know. I love that scene. And when he says, we're going to have ice cream for dinner. And she's like, we have ice cream at home. I cannot even begin to tell you how much I was in love with this character when they pull up and they're at the library.
I know.
Or bookstore, library. Bookstore? It was probably a bookstore.
I think it was a bookstore.
It was a bookstore. Yeah, not library. Bookstore. Because they were buying, I just thought,
that is so... stay open
It was just so creative. Well, they shut it down because it was a date.
Yeah.
So they shut it down and just... I don't know. I mean, I know that most men probably can't be like, hey, I'm going to shut this down, so it's just us. But what a creative date.
Creative date.
If any fellows are out there listening for the ladies, just, might want to make a note of that one.
All right. Let's round it out with the AGA.
Oh, this was so good.
It was so good.
Their story, all the feels of just being able to tackle parenthood with this little girl, to be able to overcome these just profound fears that you have, to fall in love with someone that you want to be your life partner, to fall in love with a child that is not yours by blood, but is wholeheartedly yours and you choose to raise. I was just over the moon with this story.
Me too. I loved it so much. There were just so many good chunks of things in there, rich depth in there. I loved it. The humor, everything overall.
I know. She gives you humor. She gives you a sprinkle of spice.
I'm going to definitely have to check out more of her work.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Karla is one of just a solid author, in my opinion. I've never, not once, ever read a story of hers that I did not like. I can honestly say I've loved every single one, which is why I fangirl over her.
When you met her at Book Bonanza, I have never been so happy to see you so happy.
I love looking back at those photos. I'm like, I cannot believe I'm a 38-year-old woman fangirling over this, but I did. I've outlost it. I was just giddy, absolutely just over the moon, meeting her. That wraps up this discussion of The Best of All. We hope you enjoyed it and want to continue the conversation with us. Hit us up on Instagram at Postbook Depression Podcast or on our Facebook page at Postbook Depression Discussion Group. You can also email us at postbookdepressionpodcast@gmail.com. Until next time, keep reading.